butt stuff. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be talking about... So I've been watching Fate the Winx Saga. I finished Fate the Winx Saga the other day and I have some thoughts and we're going to talk about them. Buckle up because this is going to be a ride. So before I start, obviously when it comes to reboots or reimaginings of franchises, your opinion on it will differ greatly depending on your familiarity and opinion on the source material. So to put this into context before we get into it, I grew up watching Winx. I was actually really quite obsessed with Winx, although I am definitely a pariah in the fandom because the only version of Winx I've ever watched, and still to this day choose to be the only one I've ever watched, is the 4Kids version. And I know that 4Kids changed a lot and they made it more kind of Americanized, and I know a lot of people don't like it, but I just can't take to the Cineloom dub at all. I just can't do it. Like, I grew up with 4Kids Winx, and to me that is Winx. You know, I was 8 years old when Winx came out and I was watching it on TV after school, and it, you know, when you're 8 years old you don't know that there are multiple dubs of television shows. You just turn on the TV and watch what's on. So I didn't know that 4Kids was not the proper version of Winx. I just found a cartoon with pretty magical girls in costumes with, you know, kick-ass powers, and that's my shit, really. I mean, if you look at my history of television watching, I love me a magical girl. Explains a lot about me now, but anyway. So, I am a Winx fan. I watched the first 3 seasons because that was all the 4Kids did. I dropped out after that because I had no interest in watching the Nickelodeon series. I'm sorry, but the voices were just not right at all. And so I didn't watch any more of it. Although, about a year ago I discovered the Unicorn of War. Their videos are wonderful, and they've done so many videos on Winx and the different dubs, and it's the only reason that I actually have any idea what happened post season 3, because I pretty much learned all of it from them. So I feel like I've got a good idea now of where the show went after I gave up on it. Not through choice, but because 4Kids gave up on it. So I do have a general idea of where it is now. Now, Winx in itself is a contentious subject because, well, if you've seen season 8's art style, you'll know why. Like, my poor specialists. Like, I realise now I'm 25, right? So I'm not saying that I have a crush on the specialists now, because I'm too old for them. But when I was a kid, and they were like, you know, twice my age, I was properly in love with the specialists. And looking at the way that they're drawn now, I just know that my young child self would be absolutely heartbroken that these guys that she was like literally in love with now look like animated versions of the Bratz dolls, but worse, because the Bratz at least had cool hair physics in their cartoon, whereas this is just a nightmare. So Winx itself has gotten very weird over the years. So when they were going to make a live action version, I was already cautious, because how could this possibly get weirder? But it did. They really have defied my expectations, and this is the thing, when I saw that first trailer, I thought it looked bad. But nothing could have prepared me for the actual series. So, without further ado, let's get into Fate the Winx Saga. Ugh. I made a list of topics that I want to talk about. I don't really know how else to structure this because it's just there's just so much. There's so much. So I'm going to kick off talking about more about how the show compares to Winx first, in terms of being a reimagining of Winx, and then in the second half of the topics we'll talk about its actual quality as a TV show on its own, because there's a lot you can say about it in terms of how it compares to its source material. There's also a lot you can say about it as its own teen drama, taking the entire like Winx aspect out of it. So I'm going to start off talking about the way that they've interpreted the Winx story, and then I'm going to talk about the way that they've actually written the program. There's going to be a lot of me sighing. Just prepare for a lot of sighing. And I also feel for my future editing self, who's going to have to at least try to edit some of the sighing out, because otherwise we're going to be here all day. So the first thing I want to talk about is the characters. Obviously, the thing that you think about when you think about Winx Club is the Winx Club themselves. There's a whole, like, bunch of stuff going on in Winx, but it's the girls that are at the heart of the series, and that's what keeps people coming back, because you just love these girls and, you know, just their personalities and their friendship and the way that they complement each other. And so I think when you watch Fate the Winx Saga, the first thing you're going to be looking for is how have they dealt with these characters. So let's just talk about that first. So first up we have Bloom. Obviously, Bloom has always been the main character of Winx, and in the cartoon she always got criticism for sort of being a spotlight stealing squad on the rest of the girls who were considered to be far more interesting than her. As a child, Bloom was actually my favourite character, and when I went back and watched the series recently, I cannot figure out why. Like, I genuinely don't know what my child self saw in Bloom, because she is definitely the least interesting of all of the main characters. Like, no offense to Bloom, but she is really boring. And so there was always going to be a risk of how do you adapt Bloom into, you know, this older live action reimagining and fix the fact that she was always sort of a drain on the show. And the way they dealt with that is by not fixing it at all. Bloom is absolutely the focal point of Fate the Winx Saga, despite once again being one of the least interesting characters. I was going to say I don't dislike her. Honestly, I don't know. Bloom admits herself in the final episode that she's been a brat throughout the series, so there is a chance that maybe the fact that she's quite unlikable is supposed to be part of her character development, and maybe she'll pick up a lot next series. But Bloom throughout the whole first series is incredibly irritating. She just complains all the time and gets mad at anybody who tries to help her. She is constantly annoyed at Aisha, even though Aisha is always trying to do her best to help her. And it's kind of hard to believe that the girls that share a room with her actually want to spend any time with her. There's an episode where, like, Bloom is eating in, like, an office because she, like, has been, I don't know. I can't even remember what the reason was. Basically because she didn't want to sit with all the other folk in the lunch hall. So the other girls come and sit with her for lunch in this office. And I just find it hard to believe that they even would choose to do that, because it doesn't really seem like she's done anything to earn their friendship. She's been nothing but a pain in the butt to all of them since the day she arrived. And I get it, because they've kept sort of Bloom's backstory to an extent. Bloom is a fairy from Earth, and, you know, she grew up having no idea that she was a fairy, and that she really came from a different world. And she, you know, discovers this and then comes to Althea. Now, in the cartoon, the way that happened was that for some reason that was never actually explained, Stella was on Earth fighting monsters, and Bloom basically just came into the woods on her bike and, like, threw her hands up in fear, and then magic came out of her hands, and Stella turns around and is like, hey, do you know you're a fairy? And Bloom's like, what? Fairies? What are you talking about? And then Stella's like, yeah, you're definitely a fairy. You should come to Althea. And that's essentially how the show starts. The difference in the Winx Saga is that Bloom is brought to Althea by the school headmistress, Farah Dowling, Faragonda. And basically she comes there because they don't tell you straight off why she was like brought to Althea, but it's because she had a bit of an accident with her powers where she accidentally, you know, burned her whole house down. She set fire to her house because she's a fire fairy, and we'll get to that, trust me. So Farah brings Bloom to Althea to try and help her control her magic, you know, to learn how to not burn things to the ground. But Bloom also wants to find out, like, where she came from. Like, now, when she first arrives, she's of the opinion, because this is what Farah tells her, that she's part of a dormant fairy bloodline. So essentially, you know, her ancestors were fairies, and none of her, like, relatives have unlocked their powers, but Bloom does. But Aisha points out to her that for a fairy from a dormant bloodline, she seems to be quite powerful, and that would be an unrealistic thing. And then Bloom starts telling her about how when she was born, she had a heart defect in the womb, but then when she was born, the heart defect had healed and she was like a miracle baby. And Aisha realises that, first of all, that's pretty much impossible, that doesn't happen. And that, as a result, Bloom must be a changeling, which is a baby that is swapped with a human baby by, like, evil fairy magic. And Bloom immediately is like, shut up, Aisha, that's mean, and storms off. But then, of course, it turns out to be true. She has a changeling, and she wants to, you know, find out the truth about what happened to her birth parents, blah, blah, blah. And that is in keeping, kind of, with her cartoon self, because Bloom's story was always trying to find out more about her past, because in the first series, you know, they realise that she is a fairy that controls the dragon flame, which is baffling to everyone because the fairies of the dragon flame came from a world that was completely destroyed, and as far as they knew, there was no survivors. But it seems like Bloom is like the only survivor from Domino, so, you know, it's all about her trying to find out about her past. The difference is that in the cartoon, Bloom is completely aware that she's adopted. That's not an issue. There's no, like, big drama with her parents. Her parents are completely supportive of her going off to a different world to become a fairy. And I don't think it's wrong for them to have changed that. I think it's probably more realistic to, you know, not have your parents be completely supportive about finding out their daughter is magic and then sending her off to another world. But at the same time, it was always kind of refreshing to have a series where there wasn't this big drama about trying to keep secrets from your parents, you know? Like, I've got magic powers and I can't tell anyone about it. The fact that Bloom just straight out, like, says to her parents, like, hey, this is my friend Stella I met in the woods. She's a magical fairy. She thinks I'm a magical fairy too, and we're going to go off to her magical fairy school together. And her parents are just like, sounds good, you know? Don't forget to write. There is something genuinely refreshing about that in the show, and I think it is probably a shame that they didn't, you know, keep it, but I also don't blame them, because I think it might come across as a bit odd. Like, it's more usual to go down the route of, don't tell your parents the truth about your magic, you know? But yeah, Bloom is insanely whiny, and I don't know. She's really irritating, and I can't really take to her. And she tends to be really unpleasant to all her friends. She's really bossy, like, and she just kind of is not... I'm just not really a fan. And like I say, it's hard because she was adapted from a character who is kind of like that anyway. She always was a bit domineering over her friends, despite the fact that she was always the least interesting one. So I don't really know what else to say about Bloom, except from I don't really like her so much so far. That being said, in the last episode, when she goes back home to her parents, I was genuinely emotional. I was like, what? Real emotion and Fate in the Winx Saga? But, yeah, and the fact that the whole idea was that when Bloom was on Earth, she was a total loner, and then by the end of the series, she's got, like, these 4 really good friends, is nice, and I'm happy for her. It just would be good if that development actually came across at some point during the series and didn't just feel like it came out of nowhere, but there we go. Okay, on to the next one. Let's talk about Aisha. So Aisha's an interesting one because her cartoon counterpart didn't actually exist during the first season. There were 5 Winx girls, but the 5th one was not Aisha, it was Tekna. And the Tekna doesn't appear in Fate the Winx Saga at all. I'm kind of hoping that maybe the reason that some of these characters don't appear is because they're going to keep them for, like, season 2 surprises, you know what I mean? Like, maybe in season 2 there'll be, like, new students at the school, and maybe Tekna will show up, and Brandon, and some of the other characters that we know, and it might be just a way to kind of, you know, get people to keep watching, because it'll be like, oh, come, like, don't stop watching because your favourite character might show up. I'm hoping it's something like that, but we don't, I genuinely don't know. We might never see Tekna. But Aisha was introduced in the 2nd season. To me, she was always Layla, but I'm trying really hard to learn that her name is not Layla anymore, that it's Aisha. It was always Aisha, it was Layla in the 4Kids version, so it's just what's ingrained in my brain, but I'm trying really hard to remind myself that that's not really the right name and that we should call her Aisha. So, Aisha is Bloom's roommate in Fate the Winx Saga, and obviously that means that she's introduced a lot earlier than she was in the show. Now, in the cartoon, Aisha actually has a really interesting backstory. She comes from another planet where she's been isolated, like, all her life. She's a princess, she's royal. She's always been isolated, she's always been cut off from the world, but she's, like, really strong-willed, really feisty, and got a real desperation to do the right thing and to be a hero and to, like, save people. And she has this wonderful relationship in the cartoon with this character called Nabu, and, you know, everybody who's watched Winx feels that pang in their heart when they hear the name Nabu, because, man, that if you've never seen it, you won't understand, but oh man, the pain of Nabu. So Aisha definitely, in the cartoon, had one of the most interesting backstories out of all the characters, and they ripped all of it out. She has no backstory whatsoever, and it's really bad because she's the only one of the main 5 girls who doesn't have any context to her character. All she does is stand around, talk to Bloom, be smart, and go swimming. They're, like, take a drink every time Layla mentions that she's going for a swim. Jesus Christ. But they took all of Aisha's really great backstory out of the series and just left her as a nothing character. Now, for a start, let's not get into... I mean, yes, we should, but for this particular moment right now, I'm going to talk about these things later. Let's not get into the racist undertones of making your only black main character the only character without any personality, backstory, or narrative at all within the series. Like, everybody else has some kind of an arc. She has nothing. All Aisha does is help Bloom when Bloom doesn't want her help and then constantly bitches at her, nags at Bloom for doing the wrong thing, sits around in an office and listens to the walls, and goes swimming. And then at the end of the series, she manages to alienate all her friends because she... Now, whether or not her friends were doing the right thing, basically all her friends decided that they were going to go help Bloom free Rosalind. And Aisha decides that she can't do that. She's not up for it, so she stays in the room. But she ends up that she goes and tells the head teacher and the other teachers what Bloom and her pals are up to. Now, in fairness, yes, Bloom and her pals shouldn't have freed Rosalind, and Aisha was probably doing the right thing by telling the teachers, but the fact that, once again, the only thing that Aisha gets to do is be a tattletale is not great. Like, she has no character whatsoever, and it is such a shame, because I think she would genuinely be interesting, and her actress is really good, and she does really well with the, you know, tiny bits of characterization that she has to work with, but she really has so little to do in the story, and it makes me so sad. She has nothing, and she doesn't even have, like, the other characters all have, like, connections to other characters. So, like, Bloom has her relationship with like Sky and Farah, and then Rosalind. Stella has Sky and her mother. Tara has her brother and her father, and Musa, and Dane, and Musa has Sam. But Aisha has nobody. Aisha doesn't actually like interact with any of the characters outside of her group, her flatmates, pretty much throughout the entire series. The one moment that actually like made Aisha seem cool was when she forced Musa to talk to Sam for the first time. Like that, and she's like, "Oh, hey, you over there, my friend's been stalking you." And it's like, cool, she does have some personality. Maybe you should try doing something with it. The only other memorable thing that... The only other memorable things that Aisha does in the series are talk about a time that she had to wade through shit, genuinely, and the time that she took a pee in front of Tara with the door open and made Tara feel really uncomfortable. The scene had no context. It didn't explain anything. Like, it wasn't as if this was some kind of, like, explanation of Aisha's backstory, like, where she came from, people pee with the doors open. All she does is go into the bathroom, and then Tara's like, "Oh, you're peeing in front of me, that's okay." And Aisha's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, does that make you uncomfortable? I'm not used to anyone caring." And then they just carry on talking and act as if that never happened, and I've got no idea why that scene exists. And it's scenes like that are why this series is so insanely strange. Like, we're going to get onto it, but there are so many scenes like that where you're just sitting there thinking, I've got no idea why this happened. Like, no idea why this happened. So that is Aisha's 4 big moments. The time she waded through shit, the time she peed with the door open, the time that she told a guy that her friend was stalking him, and the time that she ratted out her friends to the teachers. That's her entire arc in Fate the Winx Saga, and it's depressing. If they don't do something with her character in series 2, I am going to lose my damn mind. And I'm going to be writing a letter being like, either give Aisha some work to do, or please let this actress go and get a better job, because she deserves better than this. Moving swiftly on. Let's talk about Musa. I don't know if this comes across at all, but I specifically gave myself pigtails because I wanted to look like Musa, so... I mean, I also would want to look like Stella, but, like, I don't have dark hair. I have dark hair, so it's closer to Musa than Stella, but Stella's pigtails are, my damn life. So Musa is interesting. I actually like Musa. I'm going to put that out there. I genuinely like Musa as a character. I think her actress is really good. She definitely has, other than that, we were all really scared about the fashion choices because they put out that promo photo where they were all wearing the ugliest effing clothes I've ever seen. They actually are not that badly dressed in the rest of the series. I don't know who decided that was the right image to use as your promo picture, but okay. Musa generally has some really nice outfits. She has this great rainbow jumper that I love, and that time that she wore that eye makeup to the party, girl looked fucking great. But Musa as a character I think is genuinely interesting. So Musa in the cartoon is, she's a fairy of music. Her whole power is over sound and particularly music. And she's a singer, and her mother was a singer, and there's this whole story about how her mother dies, and when she sings she feels close to her mother. She's got this story with her father. She's got quite a deep backstory, although it comes in a lot later in the series. And they have kept elements of that, like the idea that her mother is dead is also a part of Musa's story in the show. And Musa has probably one of, I would say, the most interesting actual backstories and context to her character. So Musa's power in the show has changed from music to power of the mind, so she's an empath. But the idea is that they kept the music, and like when she puts on her headphones, she can't hear everyone else's like feelings, because she can focus on the music and drown out, feeling everyone else's emotions. And the Unicorn of War pointed out, and I thought this myself, was that there was a time in Winx where Musa said something along the lines of, I can hear the song that's in everyone's heart. And I always thought, I'm like, there is probably a connection between sound and emotion, because music and emotion, because if you think about music, music is all about emotion and making you feel something. And so changing her power from music to emotions probably isn't actually as big a jump as it seems, because like those two things are intrinsically linked. Music will always evoke emotion. If it doesn't, there's no point in writing the song. So I get that, and that idea in the series that she could hear the song in people's heart mean that she could actually hear people's emotions through the music that lives in them as a person. So actually it's not as big a jump as it seems, and I'm kind of on board with it. And the fact that they've kept her music as part of her personality but it's not her power, I'm fine with. And I think her empath ability is really well handled. They do a lot with it. Like she gets to use her magic in like every episode because it's not really something she can turn on and off. Like, it's not a power that she chooses to use. It's something that happens whether she likes it or not. And they do a lot with that, and it's quite interesting. And she's got a really good kind of build up of her relationship with Tara, because they're flatmates, and Tara's this like really peppy, chatty person, whereas Musa's this kind of cold, not cold, but just she's a loner, and she wants to be alone, and she is a bit kind of like, she doesn't want to be mean to people, but she also really needs her own space. And so when Tara's always up in her grill like talking, she's like, I really need you to be quiet so I can put my headphones on. And then she reveals in the last episode that one of the reasons why she struggles so much with her powers is because when her mother died, she was with her, and it meant that Musa felt all of the pain that her mother felt while she was dying, and she felt death. Like, she actually experienced the feeling of dying through another person. And when you realise that, you realise this girl has fucking been through it. Like, jeez, this poor girl has been through it. And so she's actually, I think, got probably some of the most layers in the entire series, because a lot of these characters have no depth. But Musa actually feels real, and she feels interesting. And as a person, like, she's kept a lot of Musa's traits. She's usually the one that will call out people when they're being an ass. Like, she's the one that tells Stella whenever she's being out of line. You know, that was always Musa's thing. Musa was always the one who wasn't afraid to tell it like it is. And that's definitely the same of the Musa in the series, but she also keeps the fact that Musa is like the best friend you'll ever have. Musa loves her friends and would do anything for them, and the Musa in the series is the same, and she's got such a big heart. She's just emotionally stunted by the fact that she most of the time doesn't know how she feels, because she's so busy feeling everyone else's emotions that she can't really feel her own anymore. So she's got a lot of issues, but on top of all of that, she's probably the one person in the group that feels like she's really there for all the others, and it doesn't matter what they do, she just wants to be, like, she will do anything for her friends. So I genuinely like Musa. I don't really have any issues with her character. Obviously there was a lot of backlash over the fact that her actress is white and Musa was always Asian coded, and I have a problem with that too. I think it's really hard not to have a problem with that, but I don't think it's right to take that out on the actress. That's, you know, the casting director shouldn't cast people that are not the right race for your character. I think that the actress herself did a really good job with the character, and I really liked her. I really enjoyed her performance. So I'm not going to take that out on her. I think she did really well. I'm going to take that out on the casting director for not casting a character that actually matched the ethnicity of the character that she was going to be portraying. But yeah, overall, I actually really like Musa. Definitely one of my favourite characters in the show. Let's talk about Tara. Tara was always going to be an interesting one because Tara is not an actual Winx Club character. The other member of the Winx Club who fulfills Tara's role as the fairy who has power over plants is called Flora. Flora was a Latina-coded girl who was demure, she was soft-spoken, she was friendly. She kind of had this hippie vibe to her. People used to joke that the 4Kids version was high all the time because her actress had this really kind of breathy way of delivering lines that made her sound like she was always high as a kite. And they joke that, like, because she's in control of plants, she probably grows her own cannabis and smokes it, and that's why she's always high. Personally, I think that would have been a great way to take the Terra, or the Flora in the series, would be to double down on that and make it that she really does grow a lot of hash with her powers and is always high. If you want to do a grown-up version of Winx, that's the way you should run with that character. But why they decided to change Flora's name to Terra seems to be because they chose to cast an actress who was not Latina. So instead of accepting that they'd whitewashed Flora, they basically thought if they changed her name and pretended she was a different character, then that wouldn't be whitewashing. Of course, that fooled absolutely no one, and everyone was still angry that they whitewashed Flora. But taking all of that out and looking at Terra on her own merits and not as, you know, a white Flora, Terra was actually my favourite of all the girls. Terra's probably my favourite character in the whole series. I know that I was surprised actually that the Unicorn of War didn't like Terra, because I found her really easy to love. She's got much more personality than any of the other 4 Winx girls. She genuinely feels like a real person, and sometimes it's a bit exaggerated, but most of the time she feels like a real human being, and her actress actually makes me feel for her, like makes me have some kind of like emotional pull towards Terra. And I don't care about a lot of the people in this series, but right from the offset, I, in spite of myself, felt really drawn to Terra. She's really happy and cheerful, and she has definitely got a social anxiety issue. She talks too much, she gets on people's nerves, she's insecure, and, you know, she struggles with her appearance. She just feels like a real person, and nobody really in this series feels like a real person apart from Terra. So I genuinely like her. I like the fact that she always sees the good in everybody, you know? I like the fact that in the very first episode she wraps Riven in plant vines because she's angry at him, and she tells him, you know, everyone always thinks that, like, the quiet fat girl doesn't have, like, any power to her, but she's like, sometimes you'll find that when you piss them off, they actually are really powerful. And I'm like, yeah, go for it, Terra. So I really liked her. I genuinely did. The moment where she's looking in the mirror and she's trying to do her makeup and she can't do it right, and then the other girls come in and help her, I just, oh, my little heart. I love her. Genuinely, I hate that I hate that I like a character in this series as much as I do Terra. I genuinely love her. I think she's wonderful. Make this whole show about Terra. Terra should have been the main character, honestly. Make it Terra the Winx Saga. Get rid of Bloom. Get rid of Bloom, bring back Tekna, give Aisha some character, and make Terra the main character. That'll fix everything. I just thought, do you think they... Well, no, I mean, I get that Terra is Earth in Latin, but do you think they mixed Flora and Tekna and made Terra and thought they could make two of them into one character? Because I never thought of that before. Anyway, the interesting thing is that Terra apparently is Flora's cousin. So in the series she mentions about how all her family have plant-related names and her cousin is called Flora. So apparently Flora actually exists in the Winx world, which means we might see her. She might actually appear in the future, which would be pretty cool. It would be actually really nice if it turned out that Flora is actually going to appear in the series, and then we wouldn't need to hate Terra so much because, you know, we could have both. That would be really cool. That would be good. And finally, let's talk about Stella. Oh boy. So Stella is my favourite Winx Club character. I love Stella. And so I was always going to be more cautious about how they wrote Stella than anyone else. And I didn't like it. Or at least I didn't like it to start with. Let's get into that. So from the very beginning, I wasn't really sure what they were trying to do with Stella. She started off, she was kind of standoffish, but she seemed friendly enough. And, you know, there's that moment where Bloom's like, you're gonna... oh, she was talking about your powers are, you know, controlled by love, and then Stella uses her powers, and Bloom's like, does that mean that you love me because, like, you're looking at me and using your powers? And she's like, I don't know you, but I'm sure I'll find something in you to love. And I was like, oh, that's sweet. They're making Stella really sweet. Oh, I like that. But then she suddenly turned and just became this cow. Like, she was really mean, and I can't figure out what they were trying to do with Stella, because she seemed to flip-flop back and forwards. So then she gives Bloom her magic ring so she can go to the other world and see her parents, which seems like she was doing a good thing. But then the girls seem to think that she did that because she wanted rid of Bloom, and she wanted, like, the burned ones to kill her. But then that doesn't seem to make sense either, because Stella needed the ring back, so she would need Bloom to come back. She wouldn't... If Bloom got killed by the burned ones, she would never get the ring back, and she needed the ring. So when Bloom came back without it, she was really angry that Bloom had lost the ring. And then the girls were like, well, you shouldn't have given her the ring to start with and sent her to the other world, and then this wouldn't have happened. So I honestly couldn't figure out if she was trying to do a good thing for Bloom or not, because the characters couldn't seem to agree on whether she'd sent Bloom to Earth as a goodwill gesture, or whether she'd done it to try and ruin Bloom's life. And that the whole series kind of plays out like that. Like, there's another bit where they're at the stone circle and Stella just starts, like, being really horrible to Bloom, but then Bloom's powers manifest and she's like, yeah, it's because your powers are controlled by your emotions, so, like, I was just, you know, trying to push your buttons so that your powers would work. But again, they don't clarify if she was making up the things that she was saying just to annoy Bloom to make her powers work. In that case, she was being helpful, or whether she genuinely meant what she said, she just knew that it would piss off Bloom, in which case she's still a mean-spirited cow. She just has been a mean-spirited cow that managed to make Bloom's powers work. And they can't figure out if Stella's meant to be Regina George or Stella. Now, Stella in the cartoon is the friendliest member of the club. It's Stella that brings Bloom to Althea in the first place. It's Stella who lies for Bloom to get her in the door, because Bloom has not been signed up to Althea because no one knows she exists. It's Stella that covers for Bloom the whole first, like, week that they're there, and Bloom's using the wrong name. And she was always the friendly one. She was always the caring one. She was instantly Bloom's best friend. And Stella loves her friends. And yeah, okay, she can be a bit shallow sometimes, but it was never mean. She was never a mean girl. She was always someone who genuinely cared and who would do anything for her friends. She was the nicest person. Like, I love Stella because she is genuinely such a good-hearted person. They all are. There's no mean girls in the Winx Club, you know? But instead they made Stella this, like, standoffy bitch, and it's like, it's annoying because that always seems to happen when you've got a girl who in traditional, like, teen drama would be coded as the mean girl. It kind of happened to Cornelia and Witch in the cartoon. Now, Cornelia's still my favourite character, we're not going to get into that here, but Cornelia's my favourite character in the Witch comic and the Witch TV series, but I can understand that, and I can accept that when they made her in the TV series, they made her more mean than she was in the comics, because for some reason we code teenage blonde girls as the mean girls. If you look at the history of television, there are so many blonde girls in high school that are mean, and the only times that they're not is when the main character is blonde. So Sabrina the Teenage Witch, her mean girl wasn't blonde because she was blonde. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, her mean girl wasn't blonde because she was blonde. But we just code high school girls who are blonde as the mean girls. And so that's sort of what happened here. Stella is a princess, and she's blonde, and she's shallow, so she must be mean. Like, you can't have a girl who loves fashion and who's rich without being a mean girl, apparently, is the way that we work here. So that really annoyed me, because that's just... The fact that Stella's not that stereotype should be a good thing, but they're like, nah, that's too confusing. We need to make her back into a stereotype. And I'm not here for that at all. But actually, by the end of the series, we find that Stella's got more depth than we thought. She she's got this whole story with her mother. Her mother's the Queen of Celeria, which is true. In the cartoon, she is the Princess of Celeria. Her parents are the King and Queen of Celeria. And there's a whole big drama about her parents getting divorced. That's kind of a lot of her backstory. And in this series, her mother is essentially a drill sergeant nasty. And she trains Stella really poorly, which means that Stella cannot control her magic properly because of the way that her mother teaches her. And because of that, Stella loses control of her magic and ends up blinding her best friend. And the rumour around the school, and Stella went with this because her mother... Well, let me explain. The rumour around the school was that she blinded her best friend because she didn't want her best friend to talk to her ex-boyfriend, Sky. Stella's ex-boyfriend. But her mother made her go with this rumour, made Stella say that was the truth, because it was better to have a daughter who was evil and who blinded her friends than a daughter who was weak and can't control her magic. So the reality was it was an accident, and Stella just was emotional and didn't mean it. But her mother couldn't have a daughter who was emotional and couldn't control her magic, so she made the entire school believe that Stella had done this because she's evil and wanted to blind her best friend. And so whether Stella's actually as mean-spirited as she seems, or whether she's trying to double down on the persona that her mother made her have, is not entirely clear. I would like to think that's the truth, because I would like to think that inside of her is the Stella that I know and love, but she's definitely not quite my Stella. She's not got the same kind of charm and joy and kind of... Stella was always a bit immature, and I like that about her. The Stella in the series is definitely not like that, but I feel like I am going to like her a lot. She just needs to progress past this mean girl thing that they've been doing with her in series 1. But by the last episode, she had changed a lot. She was the most devoted to helping Bloom, and I really appreciated that. She was the one that called out Aisha, and the one that was, you know, telling all the girls that they had to go after Bloom. She obviously cared, and I appreciate that. And she grows up and she, you know, tells Sky that she's emotionally codependent on him and that they are, you know, toxic as a couple. And she just seems to really grow up and fix a lot of her issues. So I'm really hoping that in series 2 she's not quite as awful as she has been in series 1, because I was so annoyed halfway through and I was just like, I don't understand why you've done this to Stella. Like, she's such a good character. Why have you made her such a flat, one-dimensional mean girl? But by the end, they seem to have given her back some depth and layers, and so I hope that that continues in series 2 and that we don't go back to her being a petty mean girl and getting involved in love triangles, because I'm just not here for that. I'm done with love triangles and teen shows. I really am. I can't deal with it anymore. It's not fun, and it's not cool. Love triangles aren't really that exciting. I ended up in a love triangle at school. It wasn't fun. It was actually a really emotionally stressful experience. And so I don't know why they think that teens want to watch stories about love triangles, because if you've ever actually been involved in one, it's just really crap, and you're better off without them. Both of them. Anyway, moving on. So there's a few other characters from the TV series. One of them is Sky. Sky in this cartoon is Bloom's boyfriend. They get together quite early in season 1. There's a whole story about Sky where him and Brandon, who's his best friend, swap identities because Sky is the Prince of Heraklion and he wants to live a normal life. So he pretends that Brandon is Prince Sky and that he is Sky's squire called Brandon, when in reality it's the other way around. None of that is happening here. Sky is just Sky. Brandon doesn't exist yet. Hopefully he will, because Brandon is my boy. But Sky is just so bland. As soon as I saw him, I'm like, oh no. Oh god, it's just a posh Oxbridge soy boy. Oh no. Like, all he is, like, he's just a posh English dude who thinks that going to the gym is a personality trait. That's all he does. That's all he does. He just runs around, worries about Stella, worries about Bloom, talks to Bloom when she needs to figure out some, you know, plot points and she needs someone to bounce ideas off of. And you know, swings his sword around or whatever. He's boring. Sky is boring, and I don't know what either Stella or Bloom see in him, because there's just nothing going on there. He's just a nothing character. I always really liked Sky in the cartoon. He's great. This is not Sky. This is just some boring gym dude. I hate him. I just, nah. Please, God, give him some personality in season 2, because I just can't believe that 2 girls were fighting over this dude who has just nothing going for him. He's just nothing. He gets some semblance of, like, emotion at the end of the series, because it turns out his dad that he thought was dead hasn't actually been dead. He was alive all along. So hopefully in series 2 we might get to see, you know, some personality come through and he deals with that story, but so far it has been nothing. He's just there, and I'm also sick of the teen drama thing where the main character's a girl, so there has to be some boy that she's in love with who has no personality and no story of his own and just kind of stands around, and she's just in love with him. Like, he hasn't done anything. She's just in love with him. You know, I love the Twilight movies, ironically, but, like, it's the same thing that happens at the beginning of Twilight. Like, Bella just sees this pasty boy sitting across the lunchroom staring at her, and, you know, instantly she's in love with him. Like, nah, I am done with teenage girls falling in love with guys who just stand around and don't do anything. If you're going to make a girl fall in love with a guy, at least make him have a personality. Same with Buffy and Angel at the very beginning of Buffy. Like, there's just a dude standing in the shadows, and he's like, you know, I'm a friend. I never said I was yours. And then boom, she's in love with him. He's done nothing. And right, I need to move on because I'm going to just keep ranting. So I don't like Sky. But I don't I might not like Sky, but it's nowhere close to how much I don't like Riven. So Riven in the cartoon is this purple-haired boy who is always being a dick. Like, he's not a bad guy, he's just really rude and abrasive, and he has this relationship with Musa that's super toxic. They break up all the time, and he's just in general, like, really grumpy and arrogant, and he's just annoying. I don't like Riven, right? Like, I don't like him. And I get that they were like, oh look, the bad boy character, let's bring him in. Like, I get why they did that, but he is the worst character in this series. Oh my god, I just hate him. All he does is sit around and talk shit. Like, and it's not even like he's being an edgy bad boy, he's the equivalent of an edgy bad boy in, like, a primary 3 class. Like, he is the boy that sat at the back of your class when you were 7 and thought that saying farts was cool. Like, that is what he is. He is so immature. So, like, in one episode, he's like, oh, what's your deal with the girl? Like, is it, you know gingers are nuts. They're a good shag, though. What? And then another episode, he's like, I don't get why you stick with Stella, like, she's so high maintenance. It must be because she does butt stuff. What? Shut up. I can't deal with this. This is just, stop it. And this is the thing, that's all he does, is sit around and says the most stupid, asinine things. And I'm just like, this is meant to be a show for, like, young adults. This isn't, like, I don't know what you think you're writing for, but this is my thing, is I'm like, I don't know who your demographic is, but if your demographic is teenagers and young adults, then this character isn't going to work for them, because this is the kind of thing that people, like, kids think is funny when they're in primary school. This is unbearable. He's just the worst. I hate him. At least they didn't put him and Musa together, because I couldn't live with another Musa-Riven relationship. Nah. Anyway, I'm moving swiftly on. I don't want to talk about Riven anymore. We will end up talking about him again later. Don't worry. Beatrix! So Beatrix exists to be an amalgamation of the three main baddies from the first season of Winx Club, who were called the Tricks. So she is Beatrix, because you want to be a Trix. Anyway, at first I really wasn't taken to Beatrix. She just seemed like so over the top, but actually she is one of the best characters in this series, and she should have been the protagonist, and I want to see her and Bloom get married, kind of. When they went on that road trip together, I was weirdly into it. I don't know why. Beatrix is essentially like one of the main baddies of this series, but she's also just like a regular schoolgirl with them, and her whole story is that like she came from the same place as Bloom, and her like whole town got wiped out, and she's been manipulated by the main baddie, who's called Rosalind, to try and like take down the school and like get Rosalind's power back so that Rosalind can take power, and she'll like, Beatrix will, you know, be up there in the upper echelons of power once her, you know, Rosalind takes power and everything. But she is genuinely really fun. She's just unashamedly evil. You know what I mean? Like, she just walks into a room and just commands the room just with her personality. There's a whole bit where, like, she's screaming in pain because Farah's apparently, like, doing stuff to her mind, and they're like, oh, you know, you're hurting her. And she's like, I'm not hurting her, that's an act. And then, like, she just, when Beatrix realises that she knows she's that she's acting, she just stops and is like, oh. And it's like, oh god, she's so cool, she's so cool. And she's so evil, like, she just kills a dude. Like, she actually had kind of a budding relationship with this guy, and then she just uses him, like, she just murders him so that she can get through a door. She is so unashamedly messed up. But at the same time, she's, like, also described as being this kind of, like, weirdo loner who, like, is obsessed with, like, history, and she's a big nerd and stuff. So, like, at one point, like, they're all at a party, and she finds Bloom, like, down in the basement looking at dusty old records and photos, and she's like, hey, like, you ditched a party to come and look at dusty old stuff? Why are we not friends? And it's, like, I actually really like that. I like seeing an evil person who's also just, like, your regular school nerd. There's just something really strangely endearing about that, and I'm like, yeah, like, you feel like if you actually went to school with her that you could be friends with her, and that's what I find strange, is like her and Bloom actually do seem to make a good team when they are together, and I feel like that's what it is. It's like, even though she's evil and even though she killed someone, there is something weirdly like likable about Beatrix, and I feel like if you went to school with her, you would be friends with her. And then you would be very conflicted when you find out that she has done some really bad stuff, which is sort of what happens to Bloom, is that she does seem to have a good friendship with Beatrix and then doesn't know how to deal with the fact that Beatrix is actually evil. So, yeah, Beatrix is cool. We like Beatrix. I'm going to talk about Dane a bit later. Actually, yeah. So there's this character called Dane, but I've got a whole topic coming up where we'll talk about Dane. I'm sure you can figure out what it's going to be. I'm not going to talk about him now, because there's no way to talk about him without just rehashing what I'm going to talk about later. So we're just going to skip right over him and go on to the teachers. Weirdly, I found more enjoyment watching what the teachers were up to in this series than I actually did the students. I love Ben Harvey. The fact that Julius from The Thick of It is in this magical teen girl series is baffling to me. Like, I look at him and I'm just going, eat the cheese, Nicholson. Like, he also was in Hobie City. He was an anaesthetist in Hobie City, and I'm just like, what are you doing here? But he is the best. Like, I love him. He is such a good character, and you know me, like, you know that I fall for a posh English smart man with glasses and a tweed jacket. Like, Giles, Sean from Assassin's Creed, Ben Harvey. If you give me a smart man and a tweed jacket with a posh English accent, I'm sold. Why? Don't know. Just am. I love his relationship with Tara. I love the whole thing where she finds out that he's been lying to her and how badly she takes that, and then he locks him in their room and everything. Like, I just think Ben's a great character. I love Farah. Farah is the most interesting character in the series. and that's why it's really disappointing that she dies at the end of the last episode, because what the heck are we going to do in series 2 without Farah? She's the most interesting character. Give her back. And Saladin Silva, he's cool. He's just cool. Like, I just really, any time when the teachers are scheming, I was far more invested than when the school kids were doing anything. Like, I would rather watch Fate, the Althea teacher saga. I would be so much more on board with that than this. Rosalind. Let's talk for a second about how Leslie Sharp is the coolest person. I first watched Leslie Sharp in Afterlife when I was a kid, which, to be honest, was a creepy show for a child to watch, and I still remember my mom howling her eyes out at the last episode. If you've never seen Afterlife, the last episode is really, really upsetting. It's really upsetting. And when she showed up, I was like, oh my god, that's Leslie Sharp. She's great. Rosalind is absolutely batshit crazy, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. She is so interesting to watch, and I just don't know. Like, I just don't know what she's going to do. She is so reckless and unpredictable, and I am buzzing to see what kind of nonsense she does next. It's going to be great. The last character I want to talk about was just Sam. Sam is Musa's boyfriend and Tara's brother, and he doesn't really have any personality at all. He's just sort of there, but I mean, he's fine. I just felt like since he's the only other character with a name I can actually remember, I felt like I had to mention him, but really there isn't a lot to Sam. I hope he gets a bigger part in series 2, because he seems nice enough. He just doesn't really do anything. The most exciting thing that happens to him is that he almost dies. But, I mean, it's not like he really got a lot to do. He was just lying there groaning in pain, so... Next I want to talk about the lore. So I'm going to talk a bit about the actual world and, you know, how it connects to what we know about the world in Winx. So, in here we've got the other world and the first world. The first world is Earth, and the other world is the other world. The world is not Earth. I don't know if there are more worlds than that. In the series, in the cartoon, it was different realms. So, like, Solaria was a different realm, Heraklion was a different realm, Domino was a different realm. And Sky says in the first episode of the Winx Saga, like, what realm are you from? But it looks like the realms are all on one planet. I'm not entirely sure, because they don't talk about any other worlds, just the first world and the other world. Which makes me wonder, like, you've got first, which implies, like, there's more, but then the other one's just the other. So, like, would that not just be the world and the other world? Is there a second world? Is there another... I just want to know if there's more worlds. They don't tell us, and that annoys me. Althea itself is in Solaria in this version, and it is a school for fairies, just like it is in the TV show. But, it's definitely a lot different, and I'm going to come on to that in a moment, like the way that they change stuff. But I do like the fact that they've, like, given more kind of backstory to, like, the teachers and stuff at Althea. Like, I feel like we've got a better, like, not a better understanding, but just I feel like they've put a lot of effort into trying to build up the history of Althea, which I like, kind of. I think that's decent. The thing that gives us the most interesting lore is Astradale. So Astradale is where Bloom and Beatrix come from, except that Bloom isn't really from Astradale, as she finds out. She thinks she's from first she thinks she's from Earth, then she finds out she's from Astradale, and then it turns out she wasn't even from Astradale either, so I don't know where the heck Bloom's from. But Astradale is basically a town that got burned to the ground by the teachers of Althea, and this is, like, kind of the big plot that they're trying... Well, it's like this happened years ago, but it's the story that Bloom's, like, trying to uncover throughout the series to find out what really happened at Astradale. And it's actually really interesting, because it is kind of like what happened on Domino, because the whole point of Bloom in the series, in the cartoon, is that her world was wiped out and she's the only survivor. So it is similar in that way, that there was a town and everyone got wiped out, and she and Beatrix are the only survivors. And I think it is an interesting story, and it's, you know, the whole thing about whether they did the right thing in killing the people and what Rosalind was really planning. So even though it's not Domino, I don't mind Astradale. I've kind of made my peace with the fact that it's not Domino, and I think it is an interesting way to go. So I'm alright, I'm feeling it. But when we talk about lore, we have to definitely talk about the changes that they've made. And I think one of my biggest issues is the way that they changed up the way that magic works. So for a few reasons this annoys me. So in the series, in the cartoon, I keep saying series, but they're both a series. In the cartoon, fairies just had power over something. Like, they just had powers. So, like, Bloom had the power of the dragon flame. Stella had control over the sun and the moon. Musa had control over music. Flora had control over plants. Aisha had control over water and morphics. And Tekken had control over technology and electronics. And in the series, they massively restrict that by saying that they have power over the elements. Now, first of all, shut up, that's witch. Like, as soon as you start saying, like, she's a water fairy, she's a fire fairy, I'm like, no, now you're playing witch. Like, when you've got 5 magical girls who already were criticised for looking like witch. Like, remember that Disney tried to sue Rainbow for ripping off Witch when they made Winx. So they knew fine well that the two things looked the same from the outside. So now you've got this series where you've got characters who look straight up like the Witch girls, and they look more like Witch here because we don't have the girl with the pink hair, and we've got Terra instead of Flora, and Terra looks a lot like a human Irma because she's got like the short brown curly hair and she's heavier, which is the way that Irma was portrayed in the comics as being like a bit heavier than the other girls. And then by saying that they're fairies of the elements, I'm like, you've made this so far into being witch that's actually kind of unsettling, and I really want you to change it back. I want you to stop talking about elements because it's just too close to a franchise that you know full well was already very similar to your own, because there was a whole... And I know the lawsuit, like, I know Disney didn't win the lawsuit, but the fact that they tried to sue them in the first place suggests that there was definitely a similarity there, and there's a reason why the Witch and the Winx fandom have such a massive overlap. It's because they are so similar, so if you like one, you'll probably like the other. Not necessarily, but a lot of people do. I certainly did. A lot of the people that I know who are a fan of one are a fan of the other. You know, one might be your personal preference, and the other might be one that you know, only, like, you know, loved when you were a kid and you never thought about since, but... Hey, sorry, you'll notice I'm wearing a completely different outfit and have different hair. Basically what happened is that my camera ran out of storage, and by the time that I transferred all the files onto my computer to clear the storage, I had completely lost the will to keep talking about this series. So I went and played Final Fantasy VII instead, and now it's 5 days later, so sorry about that. We're gonna get on with talking about Fate the Winx Saga, because I've managed to psych myself back up for this. So where we were before I disappeared, I was talking about how I don't like the way that they make them into elemental fairies, and I think, to sum up what I was saying, I just think that we've done elements, like magic elements. Apologies, by the way, for the state of this nail polish. It's completely chipped, so ignore that if I'm swinging my hands around. You know, like, Witch has element, like, has the Guardians of Elements. Avatar: The Last Airbender, of course. Everyone controls an element. My arm looks really fat the way I'm sitting. Just gonna cover that up. And I just think that in terms of doing magic elements, we've done that so many times. And I'm not saying that necessarily means you can't ever do it again, but it's just something that didn't exist in Winx, and I think when something's already been done a lot, changing a story that didn't have it in it and making it like that, so taking away this, you know, your fairy magic is intrinsically linked to who you are as a person, so, you know, which it is, like, you know, Musa loves music and her powers over music, and Tekna loves technology and her powers over technology, and then reducing that to you have control over an element and a whole bunch of other fairies can do the same thing that you can, just feels like a much reduced version of magic, and it takes away from a lot of the interest of the things that you can do with your magic. Like, you can have a fairy controlling all different kinds of things, and you've reduced it to like 5 categories. Just feels kind of basic, and that you've taken away a lot of what you could have done with the series by reducing it to only having a fairy that controls these 5 things. And I don't like that. I think they could have... I don't understand why, when you're creating a story, you would do something that specifically reduces the options that you have. Like, I don't know why you would take away from having fairies that can control all different types of things and reducing it to they can only control these 5 things, because I just think you're limiting your own writing here, and I find that really weird. So I'm not a big fan of that. Another thing I want to talk about is the world itself. So one of the things that you think about when you think of Winx is how brightly coloured everything is. Everything is so bold and, you know, really stands out. And yeah, okay, sometimes it's a bit garish, but like, it's one of the things that gives Winx its charm, is how big and bright everything is. And Althea itself is bright pink, which... okay, maybe a bit weird, and you're not exactly going to be able to find a filming location that's bright pink unless you film at the castle that Archie lived in Ballamore. But I do think they could have done something a bit better. Now, Rainbow, the company that made Winx, actually built their own theme park in Italy, and they built Althea. Like, they actually built life-size version of the school, and it is so brightly coloured and got really interesting design and paint and decoration, and it looks incredible. And they took that and made it a grey stone manor in Ireland, and I just don't understand why, because, you know, I get that you're trying to do something more mature, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take all of the colour out of the series. I mean, I'm 25 years old, I'm sitting on a blue couch with lilac curtains and yellow walls. Bright colours do not exist exclusively for children. Like, it is perfectly okay for you to have something that is mature but still brightly coloured. And I think Fate feels so bland when you look at it. Like, everything is bland. The outfits are bland, the colour palette is bland, the skill is bland, everything is bland. And it's just like, you know, you've taken something which was so renowned for its colour and made it into something that's so meh. And that makes me sad. In the world itself, like, in Winx, the world Althea exists in is called Magix, the realm of Magix. And Magix has, like, a city where everything is really futuristic. There's, like, flying cars and, like, loads of really interesting technology. Now, again, I'm not saying that you have to keep that just because it was in the cartoon, but again, it's one of the things that set Winx aside from loads of other things that are like it. I mean, look at what we've got, you know, Hogwarts is a big grey stone building where everything is, you know, very Victorian. Like, there's no electricity, everything is powered by, like, candlelight, you know. Even though it's a magic school, but everything feels really stripped back because of that. And then you've got, like, Professor X's house in X-Men is that big manor that they use in all Arrow and Smallville and Descendants is everywhere. It's a big grey stone building as well, with, you know, kind of wood paneling in the inside, and you know what I mean? Everything looks like old and grey in these other series that we've got about people with magic powers. And so I just think you're taking something that really sets Winx aside from all the others and just making it look like all the others. It's like all the things that made Winx individual in the landscape, you've just made it look like everything else. And that's really sad, because if you take all of that out, what have you actually got left that makes this show interesting and special? Pretty much nothing. And I mean, that is one of my biggest criticisms of this show, is that it doesn't feel like it adds anything to the television landscape. It just feels like everything else. You know what I mean? Like, it feels no different to anything I've ever seen before. unfortunately, it feels a lot like Shadowhunters. Now, I've only ever seen the first few episodes of that show because my friend made me watch it, and oh boy, we're not going to get into a discussion about Shadowhunters, but I really don't think you should be trying to mimic Shadowhunters in anything that you do in terms of television, and yet this show feels a lot like Shadowhunters. But yeah, to sum up, my point is that I think that they really missed a trick by reducing the world that they created in the cartoon to just a big grey building with nothing particularly special about it. It's just so bland and it makes me really sad. Moving on. I want us to talk quickly about the characters' backstories. I know I kind of discussed this when I was discussing the characters, but I think it's one of the things that is such a significant change in the series is some of their backstories, and I just wanted to talk about whether I think that was for the best or not. I think Stella's backstory is probably the one I like the most. It was actually interesting and I felt invested in it about how her mother basically forced her to pretend that she intentionally blinded her best friend for talking to her boyfriend just so that she wouldn't, like, so that the queen wouldn't look like she had a weak daughter. That to me was really interesting, and I actually really liked it. Even though it was so vastly different from the Stella that we know, I think it was a really interesting change. I really like what they did with Musa, and like they kept her dead mother as a plot point, but they added in that whole thing about how because she could feel everything that her mother felt when she died, it's like really messed her up as a person. And I really enjoyed that. I think it really added a lot to Musa's character, especially when we found out that that's kind of why she is the way she is and why she's such a loner, and I really liked that. I probably could have lived without Aisha's backstory being I flooded my school and had to wade through human shit. I don't really know what that added to the story. This poor girl, oh my god, like, justice for Aisha. Get that trended on Twitter, because this is just horrendous. Like, I can't believe they treated her so badly. Ugh. Sky's backstory changed. She now has a dead dad who's not really dead. It didn't really add very much to the story, but hopefully it goes somewhere in season 2. And Bloom obviously has had her backstory kind of altered in that she's no longer, like, from Domino. We don't know yet if she's a princess, but presumably she's going to have the dragon flame like in the show. You know, she had her backstory changed and that she didn't know she was adopted, which I still don't think was a particularly good idea. Like, I get why, because they had to add in that she was a changeling, and so she needed to not know that. Well, I mean, no, actually, she could have still been adopted and not known she was a changeling. Well, I suppose not. Well, I don't know. I don't really know if adding in that she was a changeling has really benefited the show in any way other than just giving her an, you know, adaptational angst upgrade. But that was the thing that they did. And I prefer the cartoon version where Bloom knows she's adopted and she's really happy, but then she finds out that she's a fairy and her parents are totally supportive and like, yeah, go out and live your fairy dreams, we'll be here when you get back. I like that. I am much less a fan of Bloom burns the house down because her mother takes the door away. And we haven't talked about this, but the portrayal of Bloom's mother is really strange, because in the first episode, you know, we find out that Bloom burned her house down by accident because she was really angry at her mother for taking her bedroom door away. And this all happens because, like, her mum comes to the door, at her bedroom door, and says, like, why aren't you going out? And she's like, oh, because I want to stay in and read or whatever. And her mum's like, yeah, well, like, that's really weird. Everyone's going to think you're, like, a freaky loner. Something along those lines. And she basically just, like, criticises her daughter for not going out and spending time with friends. She's like, this is why you've got no friends, because you're, like, a weirdo. That's awful. Why would you say that to your daughter? But then, so at the end of that episode, it's never brought up again for the rest of the series. Her mum is, like, really supportive, phoning her when she's at college. She's super nice, and Bloom clearly loves her mum a lot, and, you know, they're looking through the book at the end of the series with their baby pictures, and I don't really get where they were going with that, because it seemed in the first episode like her mum was, like, really shitty to her, but then we never see that happen again, and I'm like, if you needed a backstory for Bloom to burn her house down, you could have gone for something other than her mother if you didn't want her mum to come across as a bad person for the rest of the series. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that could have happened that led to her burning her house down. Like, you know, I made a list when I was talking to my friends, like, she could have been betrayed by a friend, cheated on by a boyfriend. You know, my friend suggested that someone could have, like, broken into the house and scared her, so she, like, you know, tried, or she was trying to fight back and accidentally, like, unleashed her powers and burned the house down. You know, like, there's a whole bunch of things that could have happened that could have led to that, other than her mum taking her bedroom door away, calling her a weird loner, and then never treating her badly ever again. It felt really weird. So Bloom's backstory, absolutely all over the shop. And then, of course, we find out she's from Astradale, but then she's not from Astradale because, you know, something about her real parents aren't even in Astradale. I have no idea. I completely lost track of what they were talking about. So her backstory is confusing and a mess. So hopefully we'll get some clarification on that in the next installment. Okay, so this is absolutely the worst aspect of this show, so I'm not going to have a lot of fun talking about this. The dialogue in Fate the Winx Saga is absolutely awful. Like, when I watched the first episode, I actually tweeted out, "This is diabolical," because that was the only word I could think to describe it. And as much as I think it did pick up as the series went on, the dialogue never did. It is still woeful. There are so many lines in this series that just feel so out of place, and I can't figure out what even like the demographic is meant to be for this, because clearly it's meant to be older teenagers, because it's got, you know, swearing in it. They say the F word, so it's not for children. But then there's dialogue in it that feels like it's something that only a child would ever find funny. Like, I mean, okay, like, in fairness, a child would not laugh at butt stuff because they wouldn't know what that means. But Riven actually is sitting there and comes out with, like, she must do butt stuff as the reason that Sky got back together with Stella. And I'm just sitting there like, is that supposed to be funny? Am I supposed to laugh? I just feel really uncomfortable because I don't know what to say. Like, I was actually scarred for life when he came out with that. There's another time where Riven, it's always Riven, says that all gingers are nuts, but they're a good shag. Thank you on behalf of all of my Scottish brethren for insulting all of the gingers, but at least you said that they're a good shag. That's nice. Thanks for that. But then it's not even just Riven's cringeworthy frat boy dialogue, it's everything. Like, in the very first episode, Bloom and Aisha get into a discussion about their Harry Potter houses. And I'm still trying to understand why, in a magical realm where everyone's a fairy or, you know, a specialist, why they would even read Harry Potter. Like, why would they be interested? I don't understand. I don't understand why these teenagers that grew up in a different like a different world, like literally on a different planet, have read Harry Potter. And they're like, oh, like, everyone's read Harry Potter. Why have you read Harry Potter? I need a genuine explanation. It's the same way that I'm tempted one day to make a video on this, but I honestly think I might lose my mind if I had to try and script it. If you've ever read the House of Night books, they talk all the time in the House of Night about how they all love True Blood, which is a TV show about, and a book series about vampires. Even though in the House of Night universe, everyone's aware that vampires exist. Like, they walk among society and everyone knows. So why would anybody have written a bunch of novels about vampires and getting the lore completely wrong if the vampires already exist in their world and they've always known? Like, you wouldn't have vampire fiction in a world with vampires. The whole reason we have vampire fiction is because they're fictional. You wouldn't write a book series about vampires if vampires already walked among you, because you just wouldn't. That doesn't make any sense. And it's sort of like this, like, there's no reason for the kids in Althea to have read Harry Potter, because they're in a different planet and they are magical fairies, so they wouldn't want to read a book about, like, fictional wizards on a different planet. I found the whole thing bizarre, and it made me really, like, when I watched it, I just found it really jarring. It really took me out of the show, because I was like, this is so strange, like, there's no logic to this. And it really set up the whole series. And then there's so many other things, like the time where Aisha goes into the bathroom and she's like, oh, and Tara's like, you're peeing in front of me. And Aisha's like, yeah, sorry, like, is that weird? Normally no one cares. What? Like, I don't understand. The dialogue is horrific, and it's always bad. Like, everyone just talks so much nonsense throughout this whole series. Aisha, when she's like, have you ever waded through human shit? I have. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. I can't actually describe, like, there's like, if I wish I'd taken a note of every bad line, although it would have been the whole show. It's just diabolical. The dialogue is horrendous, and like I say, I don't know who it's supposed to appeal to. I don't know who's watching this and thinking this is really good dialogue. I'm really, you know, invested in this. I don't know who they think they're appealing to, because the humour can be so lowbrow, but it's also, like, the show itself is too risque for children, but it's too lowbrow for someone who is the right age to find funny. So I don't have a clue what they were doing with it, but it's bad. It's really bad. Let's move on to the relationships, because I can't keep talking about this. So, in the cartoon, like, there were a lot of relationships. Even in the first series, we had Stella and Brandon, Bloom and Sky, Musa and Riven, Darcy and Riven. Were Techna and Timmy a thing in the first series? I think they were. I can't remember. In the TV show, in the Winx Saga, we have a few different relationships. Some of them not matching up with the cartoon. So Musa doesn't go out with Riven in the Netflix series, and thank the Lord, because I think we can all agree that Musa and Riven were an absolute toxic mess, and that watching them together was one of the most painful experiences in the cartoon. And considering Riven in the TV show is 100 times worse than he was in the cartoon, and, you know, talks about butt stuff, I am really glad that they didn't put him together with Musa, because I think that would have been the nail in the coffin, but at least they got something, right? So Musa ends up with a guy called Sam, who is Tara's brother. As I mentioned earlier, Sam has basically no personality, but him and Musa are cute, and he kind of, like, supports her, and he understands, like, her empath thing and the struggles that she goes through. So they're cute, and I like it, and I like the fact that when their way that they got together was because Aisha basically just shouted him over and went, "Hi, my friend's stalking you," and that was their meet cute. I actually really liked that. I thought that was dead sweet. So, and it's kind of cute the way they work, because, like, Sam can, like, move through walls, so, like, he'll just, like, appear out of a wall, and, like, him and Musa, like, make out, and then he'll just disappear through a wall again. It's really dumb, but it's a bit of fun in a series that needs a bit more fun. There are 2 love triangles though in this series, because that's just what we need in life. One is unfortunately between Bloom, Sky and Stella. So as we know, Stella in the cartoon is the girlfriend of Brandon. Brandon being my boy forever. And finding out in the series that she was caught up in a love triangle with Sky and Bloom just made me really sad, because Stella, no, like, I don't really get, and it didn't, like, this is the thing, it didn't add anything to the series other than creating unnecessary bullshit between her and Bloom. It didn't need to be there. It was quite obvious that Sky was not interested in being with Stella. He was only putting up with her because he felt really bad for her, because she was obviously struggling emotionally. But he wanted to be with Bloom. Bloom wanted to be with him, and Stella was just in the way, so it just felt pointless. I don't mind the idea that Stella's maybe Sky's ex, like, that's fine, I can accept that, but I don't think she needed to be in a love triangle with Sky and Bloom. It didn't really feel necessary in the slightest. In terms of Sky and Bloom, I feel like they had no development. it was as if, like, they had that meet cute where, like, every single teen drama where the girl is wandering aimlessly in the school and then the boy who happens to be really hot notices her and he's like, hey, you look like you're not from around here, and she's like, well, you'll never guess what, I'm not. And then they just spend the rest of the series crushing on each other. That's not how the world works, and that's not how relationships work. And by the end of it, they get together, but I don't really know why. At least, like, there is one bit where they finally kiss, but unbeknownst to Sky, Bloom has just, like, drugged him and he passes out. So then he's super mad at her, and he's like, hey, I don't want to go out with you anymore because you drugged me. And she's like, I'm really sorry about that. And then they somehow work it out and get together, so... I'm not against them. I think they're fine, but, like, I just think that they probably could have had a bit more development, because, like, sort of felt like they had nothing throughout the entire series and then just got together. The third relationship slash love triangle is the one between Dane, Riven, and Beatrix, and believe me, we're about to go on to Dane. That's my next topic. But essentially, Riven, Dane and Beatrix sort of end up in this weird polyamorous relationship, but it's really poorly handled. They cannot figure out how to write this properly, especially because Riven doesn't seem to be into guys, but then, so, like, maybe it's just that Beatrix has two boyfriends, but then Dane is bi, so then he likes Riven. So I can't, like, the thing doesn't work. What they're trying to do doesn't work, and I'm going to explain now just exactly why that is. I sort of thought that in the third decade of the 21st century that we were able to say the word bisexual on television, but apparently not. Apparently, if you want to describe someone who seems to like boys and girls, you have to question whether they are half gay or fully gay. Dane, throughout the series, clearly has feelings for Beatrix and Riven and possibly Terra, but the series cannot say that he's bisexual or pansexual. They just say that they just have characters question whether or not he is gay. Because apparently, in the year of our Lord 2021, I don't know why I said 2021, and the year 2121 is the year that Fell of the Future's from. In this current year, apparently we can't have a bisexual character. We can't just say, this guy is bisexual. That's why he has feelings for this male character and this female character. They cannot do that. At no point during the series does Dane ever actually say what his sexuality is. And he doesn't have to. But considering the other characters refer to him, like, Riven constantly says things about the series about Dane's sexuality. He was like, is he gay? I feel like he's gay. Maybe he's not gay. Is he half gay? Maybe he's fully gay. And then he says to his face, like, are you gay? Do you want my dick? And it's like, we should not be talking about LGBT characters this way. It's so crass. We are so far past that as a people that we should not be doing this. And as a bisexual person myself, it is really offensive when a TV show cannot say the word bisexual. It is not taboo to be bi. We make up the largest proportion of the LGBT community. It is not somehow this, like, secret thing to be brushed under the rug. And it's really, really uncomfortable to see a character who is clearly bi being treated this way. That being said, it's also not even entirely clear what his feelings are, because they don't address them particularly well at all. He says at one point that he thinks Riven is hot, which says absolutely nothing, really, in the grand scheme of things. You don't technically have to be sexually attracted to a specific sex or gender to find someone hot. You can, you know, you can platonically accept that someone is good looking. you know, I can say that someone is hot without being attracted to that person, if you know what I mean. Like, I can objectively be like, yeah, that's a good looking person. Not for me, but objectively. But I am assuming that Dane is bisexual from the way that he acts around these other characters. It's just really unpleasant that they can't actually just double down and accept that. What's worse is that Dane is this, he's a, you know, what they call in TV tropes a two-for token minority. He is both one of the only black characters in the kind of main cast. Him and Aisha are the only ones I can think of. And he's also our only LGBT representation that I can see. And he is probably the character that is treated the worst in the entire series. Now, looking at the fact that Aisha's already treated terribly because she has no backstory, no narrative within the series, and spends the entire series being Bloom's personal lackey, she's already been treated pretty badly as our primary black character. Dane is a black and LGBT character who is treated absolutely awful. He is terrible to his friends. He becomes friends with Tara and then treats her like shit. He gets caught up in this wonky love triangle with the main antagonist for most of the series, Beatrix, and Riven, who is a horrible person who I can't understand why you want to spend any time with at all. He becomes sort of evil and starts working with Beatrix against Althea, so he essentially turns evil. And he gets caught up in this, I can't even really, it's not like I don't want to make this sound like I'm coming down on polyamory, because I'm not. I'm all for polyamory if that's, you know, what works for you. I'm completely supportive of polyamorous relationships. I don't want that to be confused. I just don't think that what they're doing with Beatrix, Riven and Dane in this series is a particularly good representation of polyamory, and it comes across really poorly, and it just actually makes Dane look even worse. We shouldn't have one of our only bits of representation in a show also be the character who does some of the worst things. That's not good. And it makes me really uncomfortable. I feel bad for the guy playing him, because I don't know how you can play a character who's treated that badly and not feel like absolutely horribly uncomfortable. If that were me in that position and that was the way that the character I was playing was treated, I would feel horrendous. I would feel ill if that was what I was having to act out, because he's just, it's terrible the way that they treat him, and it's terrible. It makes, you know, I think my issue is that bisexuals as a people do quite often get a bad reputation because it's assumed that bisexuals can't be faithful, because, you know, if you like both sexes, then how can you commit to one or the other? The answer is quite easily. The same way that someone who is straight or gay can commit to one person, despite the fact that there are, you know, billions of other people in the world who you could technically go out with. We get a reputation for being homewreckers, from being, you know, unpleasant. We just get this reputation that being bisexual can be a sign that you're a bad person. And the fact that Dane is seemingly a bisexual who also turns out to be a bad person and gets caught up in a kind of like he had a sort of budding thing going on with Tara, but then he goes off and he's like making out with Beatrix and Riven, so then that breaks Tara's heart, so that plays into this whole bisexuals are unfaithful thing. And obviously he ends up siding with the evil characters, which plays into the whole bisexuals are bad people thing. I just think it's a terrible, terrible way to write a character, and it is very, it shows a real lack of understanding of what you're doing with a character who is part of a marginalised group. It's actually a lot. I know through most of this I've just been laughing at how silly this series is, but this is actually like a serious issue that I don't think is funny. I think this is actually really, really poor in terms of the writers. I think they've really fucked up with this character, and they've done something that's actually incredibly damaging to our marginalised community, and they should really, really go and think about that, because it's not acceptable to write characters like that in 2021. We're better than that as a people. We should be better than that, and that makes me really unhappy. So let's very quickly move on, because I'm going to start getting upset. I wanted to talk about the actual story pacing and narrative. I actually found the show to be paced really badly. I found it really slow, and I know it's only 6 episodes, but to me it sort of felt like the first 5 episodes were just like world building and set up for the 6th episode. The 6th episode was actually pretty decent. There was a lot of action. They threw in a lot of twists, some really interesting stuff. And by the end of it, I was like, annoyingly, the end was such a big twist. I was like, well, now I'm going to have to watch season 2, aren't I? Great. But the first 5 episodes felt as if nothing really happened. Like, everything was just setting up the characters and stuff, which would be fine if you had more than 6 episodes. Like, if you spent 5 episodes setting up a series that had, 22 episodes, like a full season, like some shows do, that maybe wouldn't be so bad, because you've got another, I can't count, 17 episodes to go. But when you've got a series that only has 6 episodes and 5 of them are just setting up the story, that's not particularly good. Like, you maybe want to move it a bit further move it forward a bit faster than that. It did seem to drag its way through the first 5 episodes, and then the 6th episode was like, here's all our ideas all at once. There was more like plot twists in that last 5 minutes of the last episode than there was in the entire series. So yeah, I think the pacing is pretty bad, and I think the fact that a lot of the first series has just been like, here's a thing that you don't know about fairies. It's like, we need to find out who Bloom's parents are. Here's Astradale. You didn't know about Astradale. What about Rosalind? Here's Rosalind. It's just a lot of like, we have to uncover the secrets. And I know lots of series, it's like, we need to uncover the secrets, but it just feels as if that's all they do and there's not actually anything else going on. Like, Bloom's out there, like, sneaking around looking at old dusty photos, and all that the other characters are doing is having relationship drama. So, I feel like it's been a bit lackluster in the first series. But after the finale and all the twists they put in, I'm hoping that there's maybe a bit more substance in the second series. I'm not holding out for it being drastically better, because I don't think it's going to be. I think we're still going to have just as much cringy dialogue and, bad world building and all that as we have had in the first series. I'm just hoping that there's maybe a bit more plot, because God, this show needs some plot. But let's look, before we wrap up, let's look at what I actually liked, because there is actually some things in here that I didn't hate, which surprised me. When I watched the very first episode, I was like, I hate absolutely everything about this show. But it did grow on me as time went on, and unfortunately by the last episode, I did feel weirdly invested, even though I didn't want to, even though I didn't like this series and I wanted to think this is the worst thing I've ever seen, and I still think it's pretty damn bad. I did feel kind of invested by the end of it, and so I'm going to talk about what I actually liked. First and foremost, I like Tara and Musa and Stella, particularly Tara. I really, really like Tara. I think she's a great character. She's absolutely my favourite character in the show, and I just think she's really well written. Actually, in a show where everyone is really piss poor in terms of their writing, Tara is a breath of fresh air, because she's not. She's actually really well written, and I really like her. I love the teachers. I love the kind of way that they set up that there's a whole backstory to the teachers. It just, I don't know, it added a lot to the series, where, like I said earlier, I was far more invested in what the teachers were up to than what the Winx Club themselves were up to. And I think having them have this backstory about what happened in Astradale is actually one of the, if not the most interesting thing in the whole series, especially when you add Rosalind in. Rosalind is so interesting, and this whole backstory with Rosalind is really good, and I actually am really looking forward to seeing what happens in series 2 now that Rosalind is the headmistress of the school. I think it's going to be really cool. Like, it's going to be actually fun to watch, and I'm looking forward to it, which I didn't expect to be looking forward to series 2, but I'm genuinely intrigued now as to what's going to happen next. I think that the teachers, like I said, I would much rather be watching Fate the Althea Teachers Saga than Fate the Winx Saga, because they're just much more interesting than anybody else. I liked the whole thing where Bloom went back to meet her parents and told them about her being a changeling. I think that scene was really well done, and I just really liked it. I actually felt like a bit like a lump in my throat, and I was like, oh god, I'm not feeling actual emotions, am I? And I liked seeing the girls finally become friends. I'm hoping that we get more friendship from them in series 2, because it felt like through a lot of the first series they just didn't like each other, but I'm hoping that they've bonded since then. I like the fact that fairies can be male and female, and so can specialists. I like the fact that the specialists go to the same school, because that, I mean, I realise it's just a decision to save money on trying to get a location for Red Fountain, but I think that's kind of interesting. I am sad that there's no witch school, because I always liked the Cloud Tower aspect. I always thought that was one of the things that was so cool, was the fact that there was these 3 schools, and they all had like different types of, like, you know, specialists went to Red Fountain to learn how to fight, fairies went to Althea to learn how to use their magic, and witches went to Cloud Tower to learn how to do witchy things. But there is, you know, in this series they've got that the blood witches are like evil people, so I am intrigued to see where that goes. I really liked Beatrix. I liked everything about Beatrix. At first I just found her cringy, but she really grew on me, and I am interested to see what she does next as well. I think she was a really good stand-in for the Tricks. I was concerned when I found out that the Tricks weren't going to be in it, but I think she did a pretty good job of holding the fort where the Tricks would have been. So yeah, I didn't hate everything about it. You know, there were things in it that I enjoyed. I'm just hoping that when series 2 comes around that they improve on the things that they've got wrong in the first series, and who knows. There have been shows in the past that were considered to be not that great during the first series. People said that about Buffy. I don't agree. Buffy season 1 is one of my favourite seasons of Buffy. I think it's great. I know it's got some pretty, you know, clangers of episodes in there, but I really enjoyed it. Prophecy Girl is my favourite finale in all of Buffy. But there were people who thought that Buffy was dead cringe in the first season and then thought it improved massively in the second season. So, you know, I know that there are shows that are considered to have started off on the wrong foot and got better, so who knows, maybe Winx season 2 will be a masterpiece. I don't think it will, but, you know, let's just see what happens. And that's really all I have to say on Fate the Winx Saga. Thank God this video took way longer than it should have to make, and I've rambled so much because I just was struggling to put into words what I was actually thinking about this series, but we got there. So yeah, stick around, because whenever Fate the Winx Saga series 2 comes out, I'm sure I'll be there reviewing it. Maybe I'll do like an episode by episode review, I'm not sure. We'll see. But yeah, I will definitely be watching the second season when it comes out, and I will be here to update you when I do. Until then, thank you for watching. Please stick around, subscribe, comment, like, all of those cool things, and check out some other videos if you are interested, and I'll see you in the next one.